shortage of qualified labor and qualified labor flight. So we discussed that. Energetic renovation of existing building stock is a massive topic in Europe and also parts of North America, right? So that's one that we've spent a lot of time, and it's absolutely irreversible. It's coming. Cybersecurity of buildings and how to put that through renovation or construction into place, completely under-innovated space. I wish I saw founders who would actually attack that, because that is going to be such a massive space. The renovation and new construction of grid infrastructure.
The drag on data centers was about 5% of the grid. Now, with this new inference and AI, it's going to be now 20%.
Make sure that what you're attacking what you think is a mega shift is really irreversible. Like COVID, to me, it destroyed as much value as it created for some of the founders that actually built in that space. That the history is littered with companies that basically went like this, right? And so make sure that what you're attacking is really irreversible. Whenever you're operating in a mega shift and you're building a category creator, it's completely normal that it feels too early, that you feel like, hey, the timing is off.
Okay, guys, so this episode, we're going to speak about the future of AEC tech. So we're going to dive into the big AEC tech opportunities in the next 5 to 10 years. We're going to explore some key trends and technologies shaping the future, the impact of this tech, the competitive landscape, and then if we get there, how Foundamental is positioning itself within the landscape. So, Adam, next 5 to 10 years, where are the biggest opportunities?
Cool. That's a good question. I guess I would revert to what had mentioned in our previous session, and there's a few market trends that we're collectively following, and certainly I'm following quite closely in the States. I think we first stumbled upon this in our first fund. It was in around labor. Labor is a big challenge in the foreseeable future, and the trajectory that we're at. 2030, about 40% of the labor force is going to be retired. It juxtaposed the new lifeblood, the new blood that should be replenishing the retirees, non-existent. Man, fast forward, that's a very bleak future. Creating the most complex projects, buildings with the least experienced individuals. Wow, that's going to be really, not the best future to be alive in. So how do you get around that? How do you build on-ramps? And so if you find these megatrends and you find solutions to quell or alleviate or altogether just pirouette around that very bleak future. So labor is one of these big megatrends that we're focused on. We're closely following, and so upskilling is one area that we're uniquely excited about. Robotics, certainly in some shapes and forms of removing humans out of very dangerous, repetitive tasks. Like, we don't need humans to be doing some parts in the workflow.
On-site or off-site?
Both. And so I think that's a huge that's going to be a continued trend that's only going to gain momentum in the 5-10 years. Full stop. There's another one that I think everyone was keyed on with COVID. It's like you saw the supply chain just unbuckled, right? You saw the supply chain, the volatility of lead times, pricing was just like all over the map. And so we saw what happened after COVID was all of these demand side customers like, hey, we need to make our supply chain more resilient. How do we do that? Okay, we can't be reliant on. I'm speaking from the U.S. lens here. Maybe the CCP, we're kind of somewhat in a cold war with them. And so we need to reinforce our supply chain with other supply chain partners. And so we should be looking, take the Lord of the Rings ISR on and maybe shifting our southern neighbors in LATAM. So how are we enabling to discover high quality products and SKUs at low cost that can essentially reinforce the supply chain and not be only reliant on one supply partner? I think that's going to be a continued thread and theme in the next 5 years, especially with the onshore and reshoring that's coming on board and a lot of the infrastructure being poured into the States. I think that's going to be, there's significant capital and a lot of weight moving in that direction.
That's from US point of view. Patrick, what about Europe?
I mean, the labor shortage, the mega shift that Adam is talking about, it's completely irreversible. And that's what we're looking for, right? So whenever we think of mega shifts, what makes it mega is the scale, but also that it's irreversible, right? So you can have like COVID, you can have a temporary shift, but that's actually a really poor investment as a venture investor. And so we've learned through the COVID years that we're looking for irreversibility. in mega shifts, and labor is one such thing in Europe as well. I mean, just to perhaps sprinkle in a few facts that have fascinated us and inspired us, right? So when it comes to, for example, truck drivers, which is a sector that we cover as well, because a lot of them are needed within the AECS sectors, we're already short 650,000 truck drivers in Europe. We were short 500,000 in 2021, 650,000 in March 2022. What happened? The Ukraine war started, and 150,000 truck drivers from Ukraine all of a sudden vanished for not being able to follow their job serving Europe. In 2030, we're going to be past 1 million truck drivers short. And it's actually only 5 countries that make up like 80% of the homes of the truck drivers. It's UK, it's Germany, it's Romania, it's Poland, and it's Turkey. And it used to be Ukraine, right? And so this is a job profile that is not particularly attractive to new entrants from the markets that have been very saturated, that have accumulated a lot of wealth. The younger generations who have grown up with a lot to live for, but also a lot to live with, obviously they are aspiring to do whatever they want to do, which means that, we're in a good position to find cross-border models to help aspirational truck drivers from other countries, say India, for example, or also the Latin America to Spain corridor, the North Africa to Europe corridor, in an ethical and compliant way, help them move into the life of their dreams and at the same time keep the European economy humming. The same problem actually exists around construction sites, right? So in construction sites, we talked about it, we're already short 1 million construction workers, 900,000 construction workers right now, soon 1 million construction workers in Europe. And here again, we're talking of qualified labor, right? So it's not like you can't just plug and play someone that doesn't have a relatively high skill set onto a construction site and expect great results. So it's a problem of qualified labor as much as it is of labor, right? And so that is an irreversible mega shift that we're very fascinated by in Europe too.
So if this is such an irreversible mega shift, why don't we focus on self-driving vehicles rather than...
Regulation is very difficult. I think there's a lot of firms that are trying to apply self-driving, long-haul trucking. Some have ultimately just gone belly up. We've actually focused on autonomy off-road because it's private land, and so you don't have to. There's so much regulation to be on open road. It's just almost the deck is almost stacked against you.
It fits exactly into the 2x2 framework that we were discussing, right? So the hidden versus obvious. So this autonomous interstate or intercity trucking fits exactly into the top left, which is you think it's obvious to you as a technologist or as a generalist, but it's still hidden to the market participants because the market regulation is actually not entirely clear. So you're stacking a ton of assumptions. That's one. And two, I mean, whenever I talk to OEMs, original equipment manufacturers of trucks, and I've recently had a chat with a board member who was, before their R&D chief, before that was an automotive engineer for like many years. And I asked him, hey, like, at what time is it coming? He laughed at me. When we sat at the table, he said, not in 20 years. Not in 20 years, he thinks we'll have level 4 or level 5 truck autonomy on anywhere, but he was referring to European roads.
So, labor shortage, what are some of the technologies that are helping us tackle this?
So we've focused, at least in Europe, on 3 technologies. One is on-site robotics. On-site because a lot of the context around construction sites requires you almost in any project to have some on-site component. Like the off-site value contribution to most projects cannot be 100% unless you're building, in the middle of Wyoming, flat land, and you own you have no urban infill, you have no constraint, which is not the case in Europe and actually in most metropolitan areas, right? So you will always have to have some on-site component to it. 2, education tech models. So where you basically upskill, reskill, bring lateral hires into the trades, and that oftentimes then comes with a component, at least where we're fascinated by a radical process standardization. So you pick a trade. A very popular one around here has been solar and installing solar. That's not a category that we like particularly much, but it's one that the market has liked a lot. It could be insulation, retrofit insulation. So you radically standardize the process, and you train people on exactly that process. Then you add software, you train them radically on that software, and then you add other elements. For example, infrastructure and shared services, how to found a company and how to run a company. And because you're laterally skilling these people who want to become their own business owners, and you give them the whole hardware, software, and process stack, you now help them to become business owners of their own, right? And so that is an amazing way how to reskill European as well as perhaps the US economies, right? So edtechs. And the third one is cross-border labor sourcing models. So marketplaces that ethically and compliantly help, skilled labor from other countries move into Europe. In Europe, luckily, the regulation system is very good for immigration, right? And so that helps us to look for some companies like that.
Yeah.
So on the robotics, and part of the question I didn't ask actually, but so offsite or onsite and robotics for those both categories, right? Which side are you more interested in, and why?
I like both sides of the equation, to be quite honest. Offsites, it's a little bit, might be a little bit easier to scale because you have a confined area and you have less variables that come into play. Each construction project is going to be unique, so that's a little bit hard to train unless you train on a very finite, repeatable, maybe like Monumental of having like one task you can just repeat, easily repeat. Or there's like this heavy robotics, like offsite robotics that are just building ADUs, like full stack, full autonomy. That's pretty interesting, but it's like really capital intensive, right? You have the tales of two cities. You have Monumental that is very capital light in terms of like robotic solutions, that is like very exciting. But then you have these like big behemoth robotic solutions that are offsite that are just cash hungry firms. And those are tough to scale. But I will say this, like scoping out, like hardware related firms they're hard to they're hard to be successful, but they're very hard to copy. Meaning, it's very easy to copy like a software oriented solution. Like a company I could copycat the enterprise SaaS company, relatively easy, certainly easier than doing a robotic solution for bricklaying. I mean it's fucking hard. It's very hard to copy. So like it's very hard to accomplish, but it's hard to copy. So I mean, if like that's your moat, like if you can essentially do this at scale, you can bet your bottom dollar that you won't see a new entrant that's going to come in and steal your market share anytime soon.
And on top of that, if you're now doing that exactly in an on-site fashion, you have a beautiful distribution model in construction. So this is another like vertical singularity that I think too few people still understand, but the founders who do, they benefit so much from it, is that I can offer my services as an outcome. So I can offer a subcontractor model. I just happen to do it with robotics, which with offsite robotics doesn't work because there I'm selling whatever, a component or a building, and I need to put it in place. So I'm becoming the general contractor there. But in the subcontractor sense, I have one of the easiest distribution motions that you can have. It's a buy-ready market. It knows what to purchase. It knows what to look for. It has budget. It knows the price in the P&L line item. It knows what to look for. So if you're offering that exactly the way that they are looking for it, you're running into a buy-ready market with a distribution motion that is completely established, right? And so that works with on-site robotics really, really well. Personally, I wouldn't rule out any of those, right? Because it's our job as investors and my job as an investor that I have founders actually teach me how I've been thinking about it wrong or why I should be looking in a certain direction. And that comes with the territory. So ruling things out in the sense of a technological solution or a methodological approach, etc. Like I wouldn't do that. However, I will say that right now, everything that I'm seeing for the foreseeable future points me to say that I'm more excited about on-site robotics for the reasons that we've discussed. And by the way, there's a lot of traits that you can still tackle. The traits that I'm looking for follow a certain framework. So I love robotics in general, off-site, on-site, that attack large surface areas that are homogeneous, that have relatively low ratio, or a high ratio, I should say, of large homogeneous surface area to very few edges and corners. So if that ratio is very high, you're probably attacking a really interesting trait. And then the final one is I look for low visual fidelity requirements. So if the customer needs you to have absolute perfection in the finished product, it's one of the toughest traits to start with. like level 4, or what do they call it? Like quality 10
Yeah.
of drywall finishing.
Drywall finishing,
How you
yeah.
sanded it down at quality level of 10.
It's incredibly tough.
I mean, you just picked
craft,
like, like that's space technology
Yeah.
in terms of robotics, right? So you can't get anything wrong. But hey, if you're doing it, for example, roofing, and you're chipping like one shingle, the customer is never going to see it. Nobody has a problem with it.
Yeah.
As long as it's waterproof. Yeah, still.
Well, that matters. Yes.
Yeah. So in terms of types of like tangible activities in terms of robotics that you can see are kind of relevant and work from also line item point of view are bricklaying you mentioned, roofing as well. What else?
Drywall.
Paving.
Paving.
Painting is generally interesting, although I think it's a little bit too easy, actually, so that you will see more competition there. So that's why we haven't placed any money on painting robotics so far. But paving is an interesting one in general. I could see something like fencing for large surface areas, not so much infill. So that's one that I would love to see something and just take a look. For example, if you do like fencing around very, very large industrial complexes or commercial complexes, there the foundations would have to be something that someone would have to explain to me how they can do that. But for example, the opposite end of the spectrum, I think tiling is a pretty terrible use case to start with, right?
Internal tiling?
Exactly, because you typically have like the exact opposite, like the ratio of surface area to edges is pretty poor. And then the visual fidelity needs to be really high.
Yeah. I mean, at one point,
and bricklaying, of course, we already backed.
Exactly. I mean, at one point, it kind of feeds into an episode that we spoke about. I don't know if we'll be right or we'll be way off the mark of. I always thought the intermediate step of like full scale robotics would be maybe exoskeletons. You know, like especially like alleviating the retiree. So if you can squeeze out a couple more years of their professional arc, that'd be really interesting. It would be in a sense like a wearables killer. You can like geofence areas to like not walk in certain areas of the site. That could like reduce injuries, fatalities. And so I was kind of really enamored with some of those exoskeletons that are getting pulled into DoD, to defense tech, for the obvious reasons. And then at the next likely scenario, vertical they would go into maybe for like medical applications. But I can see that being applied to the construction space to some degree as maybe a stepping stone or maybe a path, parallel path to assist or get around this very glaring labor issue that we're seeing in the States.
You go on.
I was pivoting.
Okay, so
pivot away.
on the robot, maybe last question on the robotic side. So the companies you spoke with, when they provide the service as an outcome, do they provide this service usually to small, medium type of contractor or to large contractors? I'm talking about like size of projects. Do they serve small projects or large projects?
It's a very good question. So I think the ones that we have seen most successful actually pick an ICP, an ideal customer profile of a project, not by the general contractor size, but by the project having a repeatable amount of work. So for example, in the case of bricklaying, what you want to look for is not a single family home and also not like one multifamily home or one office building. You actually want to look at, like, for example, a community development project of 50 times the exact same townhome or the exact same single family home, as well as warehouses, for example, are a very good use case for that here in Europe, where you can actually then have a very large area of bricks to be built. So it's not so much like how big is the project, it's more like how much repeatable surface area do you get.
I'd also say that in choosing your first general contractors, we call them design partners, you really have to have like patient individuals and general contractors, because like you're really trying these robotic solutions, first of its kind, out in the wild. So there's going to be some learning curves. And when I say learning curves, there's going to be some pausing in the actual production. So like you got to choose like your design partner, appropriately, that ultimately wants your outcome, like you as a company, to be a success, because it's incentivizing that firm, long term. So I think those firms, those founders that are looking to start up a robotics firm, you should be looking at design partners are looking to like grow with you long term, and they're going to be patient, because you're not going to be hitting your project deliverables out of the gate at your first try. There's going to be some stumbles, there's going to be some learnings naturally.
Controversial question, actually. On the offsite, manufacturing. Is it an innovation? Does it have a space to grow in the next, let's say, decade?
Well, don't count me as a true believer that space. I don't think it will vanish. I do think it has a place for this, all the reasons that it has had a place for the last 60 years.
Yeah.
Right. So there's conceptually not much new. I do think you can bring innovation into that part of the market, which might have to do with the amount of robotic automation, for example, that you can bring into it. Perhaps there is more standardization that we can drive top down, which unlocks further automation potential. And then it would still be applicable only to a subset of the market, though, right? And so that's why you don't count me as much as a like evangelist of offsite manufacturing, simply because the applicable market, given that whenever I buy a home and I have enough money, I'd like it to be custom. I'd like it to be individual. I have cities where urban infill with an existing infrastructure and existing structures is just really important, and so that. It minimizes the applicable potential. But there are certain markets where I think, houses or facilities built with a good amount of offsite has been successful. Warehouses is one of them. Yeah. Data centers is another one where I think I would look very hard for, constant improvement and offsite. But they're oftentimes then, not the ones that need to look good or that need to be infilled somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it does have a place, but I wouldn't bet my house on it.
Yeah, I was curious about your approach.
Let's talk about the A then. So you were investors in a few architect design, the A of the AECS. Where do you see the future of design?
So look, if I could take it away,
for sure. Yeah, this is go ahead.
So architecture and engineering. Let's sum it up under design. Is one of the earliest industries to ever get digitized, but it rarely gets recognized, right? So computer-aided design is actually a technology from as early as the late 60s, right? And yet that stack has not been updated for, I would say, 60 years. Yes, we can quote certain authoring tools that certain California-based, publicly listed software companies purchased over the years and that they sunsetted or that they kind of made worse than they were before. If you do listen to the architecture community, to the engineer community, all you're hearing is frustration. You're never hearing any good word about any of the software that is any of the major authoring tools. Of the specialty software, I do get a lot of love, right? And so I think one of the biggest problems that we have staked a few claims on is the data infrastructure between the different authoring tools, because they don't talk to each other. They definitely don't talk to each other in real time. They don't run in the browser. Cloud is still something that they only recently adopted. And so making Martin work in his software and Owen in his software and Adam in his software and me in my software, and they're all different software vendors, and we're all working on the same model with each other, it's just not a thing. It doesn't exist. In an industry where the fire simulation needs to be done externally, and this simulation needs to be done externally, and someone else needs to contribute, and I need to sign off, on something. Like, it's completely crazy with what an outdated, uncollaborative stack people have been working in. So that's why data infrastructure and interoperability has been one of the earliest and most bold bets that we have been made with, for example, Speckle in this industry. That's one part that we find super fascinating to help the community become more productive. And the other piece is better authoring tools, right? So most of the authoring tools, they look like we just left MS-DOS and we now moved into Windows 95, right? And so that's what it looks like. Yes. And, on the one hand side, that is prohibitively high, that is a prohibitively high bar to clear, because you need to invest 10,000 plus hours to master these tools. And of course, once I've mastered them, why would I transition away for some minor improvement? But for everyone who's coming into the industry, the students, the aspirational academics that want to break into architecture, engineering, that want to build with 3D and construction, now is the time to give them a better tool stack. And they will be hitting the market next year and the year after and the year after. And they are such an important and underserved target audience among the software vendors, that I think really new age authoring tools like Kionic, like Snaptrude, Arcol, and a few others really can build browser-based collaborative and concurrent authoring tools for these younger audiences, and then the pressure will rise for other people to adopt it too.
So my question, like, how do they differ from these traditional CAD systems, let's say? And I can just add to it. So when I left university with my engineering degree 9 years ago, I won't be naming, but the software I was using and I use now, it hasn't changed at all. Just UX really changed. Maybe some few features were added here and there. So there's not incremental and significant change within that. So are these that you mentioned, what do they have to offer on top of what's already there?
I think thinking about it in terms of feature set is exactly the wrong way, right? So if my answer to you were, well, Martin, it does have this 10 features, it's not
a way of working?
Exactly. It's not about feature enrichment anymore, right? I mean, I do think some of the features that you would find in modern authoring tools still have a way to get improved, especially when we talk about like enriching BIM models, right? I think it's a very tedious task for contractors to take an architect's BIM model and then enrich it in a way to actually do proper quantity takeoffs, QTOs, etc. So I do think in terms of feature, there is a way how you can still improve on authoring tools, especially for the contractor side, and then starting with the estimation process. But overall, the biggest improvements that you can make is actually the collaborative side to it, because the desktop-based versions now transitioning into cloud, they're still not browser-based. They still require you to make certain installs. They still require you to run a certain rig and a certain hardware. They definitely don't make you let you edit it anywhere on the mobile phone, right?
I recently purchased a software on USB.
Like what year is it?
It was early this year.
Yeah, 2024, right? I mean, you were glad that you didn't get CD-ROM.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't have anywhere to put it.
Right? And so then also consider, right? So not everybody is a trained practitioner. So one of the biggest frustrations, I think, for the specialists in A and E is that once you have mastered something, you're the go-to guy or person, right? So now you're the person, oh, you can write the Python scripts. Well, I'm always going to go to you, so happy, here's my work for you. And that's because these tools, or let's say you're the Grasshopper person in your company, right? So whenever somebody needs a Grasshopper script developed and run, well, they will go to you, right? So that's what happens in AE. But now decreasing the bar to let everyone actually participate in automation, participate in, add AI on top of it, right? And so allow that to decrease the bar that you need in order to operate proper authoring and simulations. That's what this technology really does.
Yeah, I also think that young architects or engineers, when they go into industry and they see how clunky the whole process is of designing things, they just move away.
Yeah, they just go onto Canva and they're like, oh, I can do this whole graphic design.
But hey, on that note, actually, real quick. So what I find fascinating about architecture, it must be and engineering is not like that. Architecture might be the only industry that I know where students do the most aspirational and sometimes most complex projects in their life. And once they hit professional life, actually the fidelity and the amount of details that they need to do decreases, unless you work for one of the top firms building, an Olympic stadium. That happens like to very, very few. But like the masses of architecture students, the most aspirational things they do is in studies, and that's almost a sad state.
Yeah. I will not be popular when I say, and I'm an engineer, I will not be popular when I say that their designs don't have any substance, because they can create whatever they want. And it doesn't have to be built. As an engineers, we need to kind of make sure that whatever is designed, it's going to stand, right?
No one cares about the engineer's opinion.
Same with quantity surveyors. Anyway.
Well, money talks. Did we miss anything? So we talked about, I'm sure we missed a lot, but architect, AE, construction, supply chain, any big tech. I suppose AI comes to mind as such a hot topic in the world we live in right now.
Yeah, I could name drop a few other irreversible mega shifts we're discussing a lot here the last few years, but also more recently, right? So we spent a lot of time the last year. So shortage of qualified labor and qualified labor flight. So we discussed that.
Yep.
Energetic renovation of existing building stock is a massive topic in Europe and also parts of North America, right? So that's one that we've spent a lot of time, and it's absolutely irreversible. It's coming. cybersecurity of buildings and how to put that through renovation or construction into place, completely under-innovated space. I wish I saw founders who would actually attack that, because that is going to be such a massive space. The renovation and new construction of grid infrastructure. Again, I think most founders attack it from the energy side. Oh, how can I build some trading arbitrage model by offering batteries? I come from energy, so I've seen all of those already 20 years ago. So I'm not really fascinated by that. But how do we actually solve for both emerging and Western markets to deal with the mass electrification of economies?
That's a big problem.
Let's do an episode just on our opinion about the electrification.
I was even saying just the electrification, but as well as now you as well add on to the scale these big data centers. I was in another episode. I was saying that the drag on data centers was about 5% of the grid. Now with this new inference and AI, it's going to be now 20%.
Is that right?
Yes.
Wow.
So we're talking like a major leap. So that's a huge drain on the grid.
That's without EVs, without
exactly
production.
Just 20% is just for data centers. They're projecting. That's wild. And then of course everything electrification. Your cars, your houses. Everything. So think about that. It's going to be. We're talking. This is going to be a $1 trillion, problem and opportunity.
And you would think it's the grid operators who grow gray hairs from that. No. The grid operators are doing this. The grid operators are saying, awesome, more money to be made. Because in the end, it's the states who will have to bear the burden, right?
Exactly.
And so that's what creates a massive, irreversible mega shift to capitalize on. But we're not seeing enough founders like building, great generation stuff.
Nope. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So on the you mentioned retrofitting. How is your search looking like for singularities within retrofitting space in the next few years?
That is energy retrofitting of buildings?
Yes.
I think our search has pretty much concluded for now, to be honest. We feel like we've made our early bets in that space. Enter is a company that we have referenced here. Varm is a company that actually is building a cloud installation infrastructure for insulators of the future for Europe. So we found that fascinating because it is a very standardizable workflow. Great to also add software and hardware component to it, and it attacks 100 million buildings across Europe. So that is very fascinating. And there's actually a blueprint company that is doing something similar in the US, but which is a company that is like 40 years old. They have never digitized, but they lay the process blueprint for that. So that's we feel, I think right now we've done our bets.
Yeah. Okay. Agreed.
All right.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts on the future of singularities in the construction technology?
Any closing remarks? I just think that the opportunity set remains resolute, meaning it's still like we're still in early innings, early days, and it's just a mega opportunity for founders to come in various white spaces and create massive companies that would ultimately proffer huge benefits to the industry as a whole.
I would leave founders with three messages on just to round it off, right? So one is a repeat, two on you. So make sure that what you're attacking what you think is a mega shift is really irreversible. Like COVID, to me, it destroyed as much value as it created for some of the founders that actually built in that space. That the history is littered with companies that basically went like this, right? And so make sure that what you're attacking is really irreversible. Two, I think the interesting part about AECS is that it provides a lot of buy-ready markets, but it also provides a lot of non-buy-ready markets.
What's the buy-ready market?
So buy-ready market is a market where there's already a budget for an outcome, there's a P&L item for the outcome, there's an established price for the outcome, and so if you sell into that buy-ready market, it's a really amazing way to build a company, right? And so we've discussed, through this documentary, how sometimes software is not the first thing you should perhaps be trying to sell. You should use it internally, but and that's sometimes because it's not a buy-ready market, right? And so we have made it a point of looking for buy-ready markets, right? And so for us, AECS in that way is very different to a lot of other sectors, like let's say, manufacturing, for example, where it's harder to find buy readiness sometimes, and so that's something we really like. And then finally, I think something that Shub said earlier, whenever you're operating in a mega shift and you're building a category creator, it's completely normal that it feels too early, that you feel like, hey, the timing is off, or that people will tell you, I don't get it. I'm out of here, and it's. I think you're doing it the wrong way, and that is not a bug. That is actually a feature of doing category creation in AECS and against the mega shift.
Yep.
A good signal then, yeah?
Yeah, I think.
Well, have
Hopefully
some
not
measure
the
to
other
it, right?
Yeah.
You can't just be building something no one wants at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's also it underpins like having some conviction and not being swayed by too many outside viewpoints, and herd mentality, as we discussed before, can dissuade you from like your passion, your conviction in whatever you're trying to build. So I would say heads down and continue to build.
Definitely.
Great way to end.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I like it. We're making predictions.
Yeah.
I was going to say, do you know something we don't know? So with that said, if you had a key piece of advice for the incumbents in the space, what would you say to them?
Don't fuck it up.
If the objective is to be acquired for a substantial sum, and what I mean by substantial, it is both life-changing for you as a founder and is substantial, potentially fund returning for your early investors, there is no way you'll achieve an outcome like that without legitimately scaring the daylights out of the incumbent.